In this video, we're going to begin talking about functions. In subsequent videos, we're going to explore them a lot more so that we can understand really where the power of this technique lies. A function is a small piece of code that can run on its own. We've actually already been using functions. You can see one right here, task main. Task main is a function, and it has a very special syntax. It begins here with what we might call an output. This one specifies that a task is going to happen. Then a name, in this case called main. Function naming rules are identical for variable naming rules, so if you can name a variable the same, you can name a function. And then we have these brackets. Now if you remember from math, we might say y equals f bracket x. This is exactly what we're doing. The output, the function name, and the input. In programming though, not like in math, you can have no input. Also in programming, and this part's a little strange for students, you can have no output. We're going to be starting with functions that don't output anything today, because it's a little bit simpler to start there, especially when dealing with Robot C. So let's look at this program. I want to write a program that drives forward, waits 2 seconds, and then stops. I'm going to do it first without functions. I might say motor B is motor C is, let's say 50. Then I want to wait for 2 seconds. And remember, to do that in the simulator, we have to use the timer. Time 1, t1 equals 0, while time 1 t1 is less than 2000. Do nothing. And then we stop. Motor B is motor C excuse me, is 0. Okay. Let's look at this code. Do you notice how this first line here is almost the same, a little bit different, but almost the same as this line here? If we could somehow collapse these two lines into a single piece of code that gets called at different times, then we could repeat these lines over and over again in a much simpler way. The next thing is, this might be made more generic. For example, here I'm waiting only for 2000 milliseconds. But what if I wanted to wait for 1000 or 1500 or even 10,000? What I need to do is turn this into a single function. So let's look at the syntax for how we do that. The first thing I'm going to write is the motor moving function. I'm going to say the word void. This is a keyword in C, C++, and Robot C. All it means is that the function isn't giving me anything. In C++, it's a little bit strange to do that. But in Robot C, remember, if you set the motors, they stay doing what you set them to. As a result, by having a void function, I can modify things like the motors and not actually have to get any data back out of the function. Now let's name it. I'll name it, how about set motors? And it does take an input, which is the motor power I want to set it to. Int m power. And you'll notice I had to open up scope blocks. The general syntax for any function is output type, which could be many things, and in subsequent videos we'll talk about them, but for today it's just going to be void. Then set motors, or the function name, and then any inputs it takes. Let's write this function. What do I want it to do? Well, set the motors to m power. Motor B is motor C is m power. Now you might be looking at this line of code and saying, hang on a second, this looks like a variable declaration, but I didn't initialize that variable. Where does the number come from? When we actually use this function to solve a problem, we have to supply it with a number. Let's do that now. I'm going to replace this line here with a call to my function. To do that, because it's void, because nothing's coming out, I just use the name. Set motors to what? To 50. So now what happens when the robot encounters this line? It looks for code named set motors. It finds it here. It initializes for us the motor M power to the number we supply, which in this case is 50. And so now it says, okay, motor B equals motor C equals 50. It does that when we do this, which is calling the function. Similarly, at this line now, I need to set it to 0. Let's now write the wait function. I begin with void, because again, I'm not getting any data out. And how about I'm going to call it wait in seconds. And I'm going to give it an int, seconds. I can actually just copy and paste this code and then modify it afterwards. And this is now going to be seconds times 1000. Let's now call that function. Right where I used to have it, I'm going to call it wait in seconds 2. Okay, let's see what happens now. If I were to run this, what do I have? Main will start. It will then set the motors to 50% power forward. It then waits 2 seconds and then sets the motors to 0 or stops, which is exactly what I've asked it to do. Let's copy and paste this and put it into the simulator. You'll notice I have a little bit of code here. This is for solving something different. So I'm going to put that there, save it, and it says I'm ready to go. When I start running it, what we're going to see is all of the functions are going to get called and the robot will do exactly what I said. I run, it's moving forward for 2 seconds, and then it stops. In the next video, we'll show how to use this to repeat actions and to use sensors.